I think we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Christine Shen. I am the senior planner that focuses on sustainability at the City of West Hollywood. I am here with my colleague, Emily Rotman, who's also with the city. And we have our great team for this project here as well, which include Ari Simon from Inner and Outer Engagement, um, Mark and Karba from the Energy Coalition, and Heather Rosenberg from Arup. So we're here to talk about equitable building performance standards, which aim to improve the energy performance of existing buildings in West Hollywood. And this is something it's a critical program we need to reach the city's carbon goals, as well as address some of the co-benefits that come with equitable building performance standards, like affordability, comfort, and resilience. So we'll go ahead and get started. Overview of our agenda, we'll go over the background, uh, an overview of the ordinance, what it means for residential buildings, discussion that Ari will facilitate, and then we'll go over key takeaways and next steps. Okay, so to level set the meeting, the purpose of this meeting is to understand and shape the policy. The current ordinance is still in draft form, so your input matters in shaping the ordinance that we bring to City Council, as it has been since we started this process in 2024. We'll kick off with just getting a sense of who is in the room and what perspective you represent.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. So just ask that everybody share with us. Yeah, if you are here as a renter, a tenant, if you are the owner of a building or a business owner, if you work on behalf of a company or org as a building manager, we might have some community organizations in the room. So would just be really great to hear a little bit about who you are. That will really help us also when it comes time for the discussion afterwards to make sure it's really targeted at folks who are here with us today. So fill out that poll. Let's take another 20, 30 seconds. Appreciate everybody responding. All right, we can end the poll, share the results. Great. Lots of folks who are building owners or managers. Thanks so much for being here. Also have a couple renters and some community orgs. So great. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, Ari. And thanks everyone for participating in the poll. So on to the local and state background. In December 2021, West Hollywood City Council adopted our Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, which we'll call WeHo Climate Action. This also established a path for the city to reach carbon neutrality by 2035. And then, so that's the local background. On the regional scale, we have South Coast Air Quality Management District proposing and adopting rules that will prevent the installation of natural gas furnaces and water heating systems in existing buildings. So we're seeing the proposed policy support both WeHo Climate Action climate goals and as well as buildings to comply with state requirements that are already in place and coming soon. So to meet the city's climate neutrality goal, we need to address the emissions that come from our buildings. In 2018, our building emissions accounted for half of the city's total emissions. And addressing emissions from buildings is also important because compared to our transportation emissions, which depend largely on the regional transportation network, the city has a lot more control over the building emissions. I will give it back to Ari to go over engagement.
Sure. So, in order to develop this policy that we're in the review stage of now, we've done extensive engagement across West Hollywood over the past almost year, really starting last spring, kind of off of the great progress that the city made with the WeHo Climate Action, the city's climate action adaptation plan. And so, kind of brought back together a lot of the key voices from the Climate Action Plan, as well as representatives from the city's advisory boards and commissions, and other local leaders to really just have some one-on-one conversations about sort of how do we develop something that really makes sense for building owners, managers, and also makes sense for tenants and renters in West Hollywood. Our lead consultant, the Energy Coalition, brought together a technical advisory committee that has met multiple times through the process. Last summer, see some familiar names here that we convened a lot of you back in July and June of last summer. Had sort of a special session just for multifamily affordable housing building owners and managers, as well as for-profit um, building owners and managers and folks from the real estate community to just really start to give us feedback on what would shape this ordinance. We did some surveying of everybody who's a tenant in one of the city's rent stabilized buildings, as well as had a lot of pop-ups in the community. I know we saw some of you at WeHo Day back in October, November. We did some outreach at the farmers markets and at Seniors in Action. And so this has really helped us get to where we are now. To go to the next slide. Just wanted to share a little bit about what we heard along the way. This is a tiny snapshot of so many comments and really great feedback that we've heard. But just really want to uplift that we heard from a lot of you that you want to see a lot of flexibility when it comes to this plan. That there are sort of different approaches for different sized buildings, different building types, different building uses. Heard that it's really important to just make it easy for the buildings that are already doing a really great job of being efficient. And lots of great feedback about the city's green business program and wanting to see us develop something with the city that actually is similar in how engaging it is, how much sort of hand holding there is, and technical support along the way. And mostly really just that the city has a real responsibility to provide clear and basic information. So what are you responsible for? What are exemptions? What are the flexibilities? And what is support is the city going to tee up to make it possible? And so some of that is what we want to get into with you even more so in the discussion later. Just yeah, appreciating these two comments. We definitely heard from a lot of tenants who expressed some concerns around, that they feel like the buildings they're living in are a lot older and don't always get the kind of upgrades they feel like they deserve. So a lot of the tenants see this as an opportunity to fast track some of those upgrades and help incentivize some of their landlords and property owners to be able to make those upgrades. And appreciating hearing from building owners too that too often building owners in West Hollywood are dragged through very challenging processes. And so it's really important to make this as easy and streamlined and as speedy as possible effort to get towards improvements while also still keeping a lot of flexibility. So here's where we are now. We've been doing presentations at key commissions. We are now doing these review sessions with you like this. We have some pop-ups coming up. And we'll just ask that, as Christine just shared in the chat, if you have questions along the way, please add them into the Q&A dialog box. We will type some answers along the way. And we'll also use those to kind of frame the discussions. You can also use the webinar chat as well. And I'll kick it back to Christine. Oh, before I do that, we have one more poll just to, again, help us kind of level set of who's in the room. Would be really helpful to know how familiar are you already with benchmarking or building performance standards? Just want to make sure if we have a lot of expertise already, but also want to make sure that if, this is new material for folks that we're being in depth. So it would be really great to hear how familiar you are coming into this session with benchmarking or BPS policies. We know there's a lot of building owners who have been required to benchmark already through state of California laws. So, all right, we can end the poll and share the results. Great. A really nice spread. So we will try to, especially for those that are really unfamiliar or have just heard of it but not really sure about it, we'll make sure we answer any of the questions you have. For those who are already very familiar, thanks for hanging in there. And I'm sure you're going to bring your own sort of expertise of how this works. We'll be excited to hear from you about best practices, what's worked, what hasn't.
Thanks, Ari. Okay, so what does a BPS mean for West Hollywood? A building performance standard requires existing buildings that are covered by this policy to meet specific energy use and or greenhouse gas emission performance targets by a deadline. And these are different for different property types. So it's not a one size fits all approach. We understand that different buildings and uses will have different kind of appliances and energy intensity. So it is, we do have different performance targets based on the different property types. And the targets that we set get more ambitious over time to achieve enhanced performance. And the amount of work that a building needs to put in to comply with certain targets that are set depends on the actual performance of the building, which is why it's really important for these policies to also include benchmarking requirements so that we can actually track how buildings are actually performing in as opposed to hypothetical. So building performance standards typically target larger buildings since those have the highest greenhouse gas emission impacts. The team looked at a few different scenarios for building sizes, and we're recommending a 20,000 square foot threshold, which would mean that all buildings larger than 20,000 square feet would be subject to this policy. So thinking maybe a multifamily building that has over 20 units. And since West Hollywood has about 5,000 existing buildings, a 20,000 square foot threshold has about only impacts 6% of the buildings in West Hollywood, which comes out to 310. And of those impacted buildings, about 200 are residential, and about half of those are actually are rent stabilized buildings. So the draft ordinance addresses the following four big questions. Who must comply? All existing buildings that are over 20,000 square feet need to comply. We do allow exemptions for buildings that may have a demolition permit, may have not been occupied for more than half the year or was fully vacant for more than half the year, as well as exemptions for buildings that can show that they're undergoing financial hardship. What are the requirements? Buildings are required to annually benchmark, which means submitting their energy data to the city. And that can be done through a third party or self-reporting. And then we have performance targets in 2028. Starting then, buildings would need to meet a specific performance target that's set for that property type. And then every 4 years after that, ending in 2036. So the first benchmarking year and every interim and final performance target year, we are going to require that the benchmarking be submitted and verified by a third party consultant. And then we will go over how the city can support the buildings meeting all these different requirements. So how do folks comply? So folks can comply by meeting those performance targets, or to give our buildings more flexibility, which is what we've heard from our engagement so far, they can create an action plan that will outline how and when they will meet the next target. And what happens if a building fails to comply? There are different fines for different kinds of violations. We have a flat fine if a building doesn't benchmark annually, and then if a building doesn't meet its performance targets and also doesn't have an action plan that goes over how they will meet the performance targets, there will be progressive fines that are based on how far that building is from the target. And we're really hoping that the fines are the last resort and that the supportive programs that the city will offer and the flexibility of this action plan gets us to 100% compliance. So what can be included, what needs to be included in the building performance action plan? First, the building would need to conduct an energy audit or retro commissioning audit, which allows the building and building owner to find opportunities that will reduce emissions, lower bills, and save energy. The second part is to prepare a distributed energy resource report, which analyzes opportunities for that building to put solar and storage. And this doesn't require, we don't require solar and storage, but we just want folks to analyze the different opportunities that their specific building may have. And then the last step is to submit a report that outlines a timeline for making upgrades and when and I guess at what point and what upgrades that building can make. So why it matters for homes. A policy that improves existing buildings not only helps the city meet its climate goals, it also has the additional benefits of creating healthier and more comfortable homes. And when folks don't need to use as much energy to cool and heat their space to a comfortable temperature, this has the potential to save our community members money on their energy bills. And then, as we mentioned with the action plan, buildings are incentivized to add on-site solar and storage, which would increase their resiliency. So what implementation of an equitable building performance looks like in West Hollywood, I will pass it on to Mark from the Energy Coalition.
Great. And maybe we'll answer some of the questions as we go. But basically, we just want to give folks a sense. It seemed like there was a good spread of people, both familiar and not familiar. So this will be an introduction, and we can ask questions as we go. And, we can do, follow up if there's additional questions. But the first thing to do here is to benchmark your building annually. There's a free tool that 100% of any agency in the US, and actually it's internationally used, to just see how your building's doing, right? Gather the information. What type of building do you have? What kind of, how many square feet? Things about, how many parking stalls, just some basic indicators that help you get a right-sized assessment of your key performance indicators of the building. And it outputs how much energy per square foot do you use. Usually it's a pretty straightforward process. A lot of times people can self-perform this. Other times you may need a little help, but the first year's the most effort. Every year thereafter, it should pretty much be on autopilot because you can automate the collection of information and data when it comes to the energy use, both electricity and gas. And there's ways that the state has created laws to allow the building owners, which I know there's mostly building owners on the call here, also property managers, to get that data pretty easily. And once you do that, you would just check the numbers and submit it annually. And this aligns with the statewide ordinance for buildings over 50,000 square feet. So we have some information on that as well. But this really aligns with what the state already requires. It's just downscaled to West Hollywood's building stock. So then let's go to the next part of this process. Once you have that information, you may already be in compliance, right? And we've made these mile markers in the ordinance for the building performance action plan and the performance outcomes. Pretty achievable. We've spent a lot of time to contour those to each building type to accommodate mixed use buildings, and also give a very long runway so that it also aligns with the natural turnover of equipment that, equipment does not last forever and it breaks. So we wanted to give a long runway, and we have an additional slide on that. But at this point, once you have a barometer of how your building's doing, then you start looking at it. I know there was a question about audits, which I'd love to get some more information on. But there's an audit phase and a planning phase where you size up what you can do, what it may cost, and then let's go to the next one. you'll look at, okay, what opportunities are there? And there's some off ramps also if there's financial hardship and certain exemptions. And we'd love feedback on that to make sure that if this is just not right for your building, that's fine. But what we want to do in this part about collecting quotes and doing the planning process is to really understand, you know, what does that retrofit pathway look like out until 2035, 2036, and really give some guidance on using the actual rates for electricity and for gas and how much they may escalate. And there's guidance on that. And really, if it's a good financial decision, it would probably make sense like to do it. There's access to capital challenges, but in some cases it just might be really difficult, hard, and we want to see that. We want to get closer to the answer before we really take a harder line on the enforcement part. And there's a huge degree of flexibility built into this process. So this is really a partnership with a common goal at the end. So once we do that, then you really go into the compliance cycle. So if you can do some work in this red phase, then go ahead and do it. If that's just not the right time, you get another bite at the apple, and you can take another look and try again. Maybe prices have come down. Maybe energy prices have gone up so much that it makes total sense to go this path. And then the last step is ultimately compliance, and we're always a year lagging. So in 2036, we would collect data of what happened in 2035. So that benchmarking is constant. And then you have, about 3 or so opportunities to retrofit your building or defer that opportunity to later. But as long as you have a plan and we can make sense of it, and we know that we're getting to the finish line, you would be in compliance. But ultimately, that 2036 target is the end goal. So let's go to the next slide. As we mentioned, the benchmarking process happens from Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's a free tool. It's pretty straightforward. Like we said, there's already 15% of the buildings already in compliance with this, like today. So that's great news. There's peers that have done it. We hope to build a network and some peer learning around that. And then also, in addition to connecting with peers, there's going to be some dedicated resources around this. So there's a help desk. There will be a team to support this. Education and training will be available, and then connections to incentives and rebates, financing, all that kind of stuff will be part of it. Let's go to the next slide. So ultimately, like we said, there's a few mile markers that we have in here. So we will set your initial baseline year. It doesn't penalize people for having really good buildings that have been built recently. We just need a barometer to show where we are along this trajectory of ultimately meeting the citywide climate action goal. So there's interim standards that we think are pretty flexible. We even looked at some of the submitted data already from those buildings that were 50,000 square feet or over, and half of them already met like the 2028 mile marker. And we have a pretty generous metric for both multifamily and lodging. I know that we're in residential today, but there's a pretty good chance you're going to have a longer runway maybe compared to other buildings just because of the way that the energy code works and some of the flexibility that we have designed into here, knowing that we have the rent stabilization ordinance and constraints and pass-throughs. So let's go to the next slide. This is just a sampling of some things that you may be considering. So this is not an exhaustive list, and these are not exact numbers, but we do have, through our research, we've gone through pretty meticulously and looked at everything that these combinations of packages or single packages that could be installed, and with the payback periods, a lot of which were under 3 years. But you can expect to do things like lighting or things like low flow fixtures that reduce the water heating demand. So there's other things in here too. If you upgrade a thermostat, do it smart thermostat. So there's some pretty straightforward things here that should all sound pretty familiar. Some of the bigger ones or more common ones would be to look at heat pumps. So heat pump water heaters, they overwhelmingly save on the operational side energy, and there's pretty good rebates for them right now. Um, Same thing with heat pump for space conditioning. It's less equipment to maintain, in some cases, lower first costs when you consider replacing both the cooling and heating source. And also, it's more advanced technology, more controllable. Um, so these are just a short list of things. Also, with the time to install, we also wanted to consider that. How much of a disruption would this potentially mean to tenants, and what combination of things can get people to the finish line? So that's why, again, we put in these several mile markers with the ability to kind of accrue or defer the cycles so that you can align your compliance with the ultimate end goal without having to say, by 2028, you have to be here or else you're going to get fined. And by 2032, you have to be here or else you're going to get fined. We really tried to make this as flexible and accommodating as possible. And more feedback is obviously welcome. And I know that questions are still coming in. So let's go to the next one. And I think that's going to eventually go back to Christine in the next slide or two. But we, again, have the 2028, 32, and 36 goals, and those can be done through doing the audits and making the upgrades, and then getting support through the retrofit accelerator, which will help make sense of those audits, right? And it will help be an advocate for you as a building owner to make sure that if you get an audit and there's no takeaway recommendations, I really want to understand that more, because in some cases your building is really good and there's not a whole lot that can be done, but there's always something that can be done. So this is, hopefully a chance to give you a little bit of backing to be able to make sure that you're getting the most of either what you're paying for or the services that you're looking for. And then the city also has, $250,000 of a grant from the Clean Power Alliance to really offset these costs. So hopefully we want to put that to good use, prioritize the right buildings. I think probably folks on this call are probably in that cohort. So we would love to speak more. Let's go to the next one. And I know that we do want to get through the next slide so we can ask more questions. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Mark. So here is a sample of programs that offer financial and technical assistance for better residential buildings. We have a few statewide and local initiatives that are coming online for building decarbonization specifically. The California Energy Commission is launching a statewide direct install program and incentive program that will offer loan options for low carbon technologies that would support this policy. Southern California Regional Energy Network offers multifamily building owners incentives and technical support for energy upgrades. And as Mark mentioned earlier, we were recently awarded $250,000 to support our building owners to meet the requirements of this policy through supporting them through like offsetting some of the costs of the energy audits if they were going through the building performance action plan pathway, as well as financially supporting the upgrades that need to be done to the building. And we will be prioritizing folks based off of need and income based. So we are also working with USGBC on the technical side to develop a building performance hub, which will offer resources for building owners, tenants, as well as contractors. So we're definitely keeping updated on the different kind of programs and incentives that are available, and coordinating with these different organizations and utilities so that we can offer this to our community. And I will bring it back to Ari to take us on our last poll.
All right. This will really help kind of cue us up for the discussion. Thanks so much, Christine and Mark, for all of that. Yeah, as shared, we also want to make sure that the feedback we're getting today is both about the ordinance itself and also really about sort of what you think is most critical for implementation. And in order for the city to do this right, what would that look like? And so it would be really helpful to hear from you all about what areas you would like the most support on, what would be the most of benefit if the city is sort of looking for key areas to prioritize, sort of their time and resources and making sure that folks feel really supported. So I'll give us another 30 seconds or so just to make sure you fill out the poll around, yeah, what would you like the most support on? Where can the city be most of support? All right. Thanks, everybody. We can end the poll, share the results. Great. So looks like across the board, sounds like definitely support is warranted. Yeah, appreciating definitely helping with the actual applications to get rebates and incentives. That makes total sense. Followed by sort of a tie between actual just the cost of compliance and even sort of the support in doing the benchmarking itself. To answer one of the questions that was in the Q&A, Mark, you can sort of speak further to this, but just to clarify that the benchmarking itself is a free tool. And so, but there's definitely roles that the city can play in sort of supporting property owners through the process of benchmarking. Mark, do you want to speak to that a little more though?
I mean, there's a couple related questions to that.
Yeah.
So one of it, the distinction between multifamily apartment and a commercial building. I mean that's definitely true, right? Well, I'll come back on video here. So there's certain things that the building owner has control over and can do, right, in the common area. I know Heather has a lot of experience here. If you want to chime in on that, that's could be helpful. But in terms of that response to it, so there's also the consideration of condos. So with condos, there's the HOAs and the HOAs in this case, and we've looked at other cities how they handle this, both in California and outside. And as a responsible entity, we want to try and maybe make some additional updates to the ordinance to accommodate condo owners. So if you are, we'd love to hear your feedback there, because there's just certain things as the owner you can't you don't have control over, right? So how can you be in compliance for a condo HOA ownership as opposed to a more centrally controlled apartment? So we're thinking a little bit more through that and see if we can bifurcate the common area definition, which you can classify and label in Portfolio Manager. That's the great thing about it. In terms of the availability of data, some of the aggregators will not release control of data mapping back to building owners. Well, we really don't want to map it back to building owners. The whole point is or tenants. We do want to look at the aggregate, what the building's doing. And even at the 10,000 square foot threshold, that still is highly unlikely to violate customer privacy or private identifiable information. And there's state law around that. And it was specifically designed to provide building owners the ability to request aggregate data about their buildings to make really informed decisions on that central equipment, if it exists, or just general investment decisions about your building, whether it be facade upgrades or central heating and cooling mechanical systems, and shared water systems. So there should be some good news in there. We can really clarify and do all the hands-on work with folks as we do that. But Ari, just remind me if I didn't in that explanation cover the question that you also prompted.
Yeah, no problem. This is a really great sort of place for us to kick off our discussion. Just sort of we had a question around just that I think sometimes we found along the way when people hear benchmarking, they're thinking like full-blown audit. And so if you can just sort of help us clarify a little bit, like what do we mean by benchmarking, recognizing that that's probably a much lower sort of, barrier to, or it's a much easier to achieve. And then, yeah, cracking into this question of, that how sort of like we're making distinctions between different building types, and what the targets are.
Sure. Yeah, we can go a little bit more into benchmarking to start, but it's really the first step, just like anything else you might do in going to the doctor, getting your car looked at, doing anything like that. You just need to know what are the key things to measure and how does that compare across a couple different lenses. So with benchmarking, you really want to see, I have a multifamily building. How does it compare against other multifamily buildings across the US? So portfolio manager has the ability to compare that. And they whether normalize, they basically take out all the X factors in that, because a building in West Hollywood is not going to have the same needs as like in Minnesota, right? Um, so you can compare it against that with, standardized things. And that's why you collect some of these extra things like, how many bedrooms, how many parking spaces, where is it? Um, but then you also can compare that building across other buildings in the state, which are more comparable. Then also you can downsample it to buildings in the region. What you can also do is compare that building against yourself. So how is it done over time? So you can really track, what that looks like. You can look at, have the dollars spent on bills go down? Have they gone up? What are the impacts? Then you can also compare that building across scenarios, right? So I had a building that hasn't been renovated since like 1978, or we've done things along the way. But then you can also key into, hey, on this date, I made a change. I want to see what that looks like. You can measure it for a period of months, maybe 12 months, which in this case we're doing 12-month periods. And you can see, did I improve? Did it get worse? What does it look like? So that's one thing there. Distinguishing against buildings, I will say that historic buildings are covered in this. Historic buildings are covered in the statewide law. They do not have exemptions, but we do realize there's certain things that are going to be a little bit more difficult, right? The aesthetics, the windows, things like that. There are some good retrofit options for those, so we'll have to make accommodations, but wholesale blank, benchmarking doesn't require any, going and swinging a hammer in a building. It just says gather some data, let us help you make sense of it. Hopefully, it is informative to you. So we can look at that. So we do align with the state law in terms of what's exempt and not. And then also portfolio manager has distinct classifications of buildings. So it says, hospitals are going to be super energy intensive, where an unconditioned like warehouse. These are just classifications that are defined in portfolio manager, like in the tool. They're going to be very different. Retail is going to be different. There's also mixed use, but also lodging and multifamily. Those are different. I think I'll stop there. That's probably a good stopping point. But the point of this is to be very flexible and not prescriptive. We're not saying do X, Y, and Z. We're not saying pick something from list and do it. And if it's not on there, you can't comply. This is, here's an outcome, write a plan, get to the finish line. Maybe your building's already there. Congratulations. We have ways of doing recognition and things like that. But this is really meant to be a pretty flexible pathway for folks. We can go to another question, or we can stick on this topic.
Yeah, let's take, we have a couple more questions both in the Q&A and the chat. And I'll just invite everybody again, if you please keep writing in your questions. It's super helpful. We'll get to as many as we can. We can even linger a little longer if we need to. So keep those questions coming. We have a couple questions, as you said, Mark, related to condos. And Yeah, curious first to just Cheryl had a question in the Q&A, just talking that when it comes to the building performance action plan, so again, that's if you can't meet the targets, there's this sort of flexible alternative pathway. That's really just sort of an action plan that you're reporting. And so, but that the proposed section says that that'd be sort of recorded against each property. So does that mean that West Hollywood would do that against all of the condos in a building or the building at large?
Or that's the question related to 1350.070.
Yes.
Yeah. I may have to defer to the city on this one, but Christine, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so as it's written, the city has the option to, it's very has the option to, but it's very unlikely that the city would do that. Um, so yeah, it would be unlikely that the city would file against all condos in a building. Thanks for the question, Cheryl.
Yeah, and to that note, sort of hearing underneath your question, Cheryl, and maybe, I think there is some language that we're already sort of based on your feedback, which has been so helpful, and other condo owners too. We are putting together kind of a special FAQ and one pager for condo owners, and sort of, working with you and others to sort of add some proposed language to, what gets sort of sent to council. So, yeah, really appreciate that. Another question from Michael around kind of the idea of grants and if a condo building wanted to do something such as solar panels, if there would be an opportunity to apply for something like that. Christine, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the city's Go Solar program, and maybe we can even go back to the incentive slide?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Michael. So the city has partnered with Sage to have it's like a solar marketplace that is virtual that folks can go get multiple quotes from different solar installers. And then they also have a page specific for condo buildings that have a lot of guidance on like best practices of best ways that you can approach installing solar on a condo building, as well as like what are some characteristics for a successful condo solar project. So I will put that in the chat for you to take a look at. And in terms of like financial assistance, that is something that the city is exploring as part of our climate action plan implementation is to develop a retrofit accelerator. So we want to, and that would provide technical as well as financial assistance. And we'll be asking or recommending to City Council to budget enough money for the city to offer those programs to our building owners.
That's great. Thanks, Christine. I'll also, because we're on this page, we'll just sort of tease up. The U.S. Green Building Council California is developing a building performance hub that is both supporting municipalities like West Hollywood in really sort of syncing around building performance. So I think that's like one thing that we didn't really capture in the slides, but an important piece of this too is that, and maybe Heather, you can speak a little bit more to this as well. That we have other local jurisdictions who are pursuing this at the same time. Because ideally, we know that there's a lot of building owners in West Hollywood who are also building owners across the region. And so it's much easier, obviously, if there's some kind of, region-wide standards, recognizing that, the city is already needing to meet at the very base minimum, the state standards as well. So there are, I feel like, just so many opportunities and conversations being had right now, and a lot of sort of interesting green financing and green tech opportunity. But yeah, Heather, wanted to see if you wanted to sort of add on to that at all.
Yeah, I just want to share a new website that actually I think was just soft launched today. So haven't vetted it. This is not directly associated with WeHo, so just so you know. But I think it's a useful place to look for a lot of different funding and financing opportunities around decarbonizing affordable housing, both regulated and unregulated, or what some people call naturally occurring. So I'm just putting that in the chat as a resource. And I think there's lots of interest in this area to make sure that there are funds to support retrofits, to make sure that people are able to stay housed, that this isn't the issue that's going to force you out of your home or make your home, living in your home, unaffordable. I don't think that's the intent of this. I think that's the opposite of the intent of this, to keep the community safe and accessible. So just one of many resources to share. And then I will sort of underscore the important role that USGBC California is doing in convening this, and just a really a lot of work across a lot of jurisdictions in the area, the city of LA, West Hollywood, LA County, or West Hollywood, LA County, Santa Monica, are all talking to each other to try and align and bring support in different ways. So all of those things are happening. And I think, as resources emerge, then they'll be pushed out and shared.
Thanks, Heather. That's great. Take another question that's coming here in the Q&A, one that I'm personally really appreciating. We talked a little bit actually at length about this in our sort of workshop this morning for commercial building owners. Appreciating this question from Mark around engaging tenants in this process too. And so recognizing that this session is sort of more designed for multifamily owners, managers, but we have done a lot of engagement with tenants. But I really hear that, I think so far a lot of the engagement we've done with tenants is, yes, of course, to recognize sort of their responsibility and a little bit of educating around energy efficiency. But of course, we've also really wanted to make sure first and foremost that tenants feel protected and supported through this kind of policy too. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on that. But really, I think this question cracks into something really important, which is that of course, how energy is used in a building is not just up to owners. It's actually really primarily up to sort of how tenants are using appliances and things in their own units. And so, I think that's, I think one great example that I'll sort of tee up, and then I'm curious for the city to share a little bit more. So the city has a sort of green business program for its small business owners who by and large mostly are also tenants, and really recognizing that those usually are some of the sort of largest in terms of per square footage energy users amongst tenants in the city. And have really sort of offered them this pathway it's free to sign up, free to be part of, and offers a ton of direct support in both education and rebates and opportunities of how to be a more energy efficient business. And I'm curious, Christine, or even Emily, where you see similar opportunities of how we do that with renters and tenants in the city too, and in residential buildings.
Thanks, Ari, and thanks, Mark, for that question. So yes, so meeting the performance targets can be done through energy efficiency and electrification upgrades, but behavioral changes is also a big part of that. And as part of the policy development for this building performance standard, we did reach out to tenants through the rent stabilized newsletter that goes out to every rent stabilized tenant. And so we would continue to use that communication channel to promote these kinds of energy efficient conservation behaviors when this does get adopted. And then we're also going to be providing education and outreach for all stakeholders involved in the implementation of this.
Great. Thanks, Christine. A couple more sort of specific questions coming in the chat. question sort of on the formulas of like multi-tenant properties. Yeah, I know we sort of just brought up that there are different sort of ways that sort of benchmarking or sort of what the standards are will be calculated by building type. So maybe I don't know, Marker, if someone wants to sort of speak to that. I think Heather, you can also talk about sort of some unique aspects for affordable housing buildings.
Ari, I can answer it for in terms of the rent stabilized properties and cost pass-through. So if if the building is rent stabilized, then it's likely that the costs are not allowed to be cost passed through to the tenants, and that's um, in our rent stabilized ordinance. As for market rate properties, I will ask Heather and Mark on how that's typically done, but that would be, I would think, decided by the property management or owners.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't looked at the affordable housing rent stabilization ordinance in a minute, but my understanding is that pass-throughs are not allowed, certainly for regulated, but I thought that was for unregulated as well. So the difference between regulated and unregulated means that the provider, if it's regulated, the provider as part of a development deal or something like that has said they will commit. So it's really a better word is covenanted versus uncovenanted. They will provide, affordable housing at some level for some period of time. And then naturally occurring is housing that, is affordable for other reasons. It just is, at or below market value or below market value and affordable to a broader range. So I'm going to let the city talk about, exactly what the rent, what's in the rent stabilization, but I can tell you that the city of West Hollywood has one of the most protective affordable housing rent stabilization ordinances, certainly in the state. So I think where we're working with other jurisdictions and having to do a lot of work of thinking about how to specifically protect affordable housing, WeHo's affordable housing is protected by default.
Yeah, and maybe to like tee off of that one with the time remaining is really I like that very last question about the multifamily building in 1972. I mean, this is like the perfect case here. Because those wall-mounted like units, those HVAC units, in a rating wise, they have like a 10-year lifespan, 10 to 15 years. You maintain them, they could probably go on. But what that means is that over the life, if you just installed those, they may conk out at some point during the life of this ordinance. In addition to that, right, you're going to also have a heating system that probably complements that in some capacity. So having 2 units in 1 bedrooms and more, that's one, a tremendous amount of electricity being used, but also a tremendous opportunity to replace those with like a double whammy of a heat pump. And there's really good units that are out there, wall units that bring fresh air, that are very affordable, that produce both heating and cooling, minimally invasive to install, little disruption to the tenant, and less and easier maintenance, right? Like you can maintain these things unlike a chiller or a very specialty contractor that has to come out. So that should be really good news. The age of a building, 1972 is before the building code, which was 1978. So there's a tremendous opportunity in the vintage of that building. And that just points to really at the end of the day, this ordinance really educating folks to say, hey, this is the latest technology. It's not bleeding edge. It's not like novel, but these are the alternatives that are out there to what we all grew up with or that we're familiar with. And this is how you can save money in your building, right? This is how you can replace something. That just makes a ton of sense. And hey, by the way, you have a starting point, a reference point. You have, an advocate of the city and the accelerator in your corner to help you evaluate those decisions. And if those decisions and the numbers don't like crunch out, we'll defer it and check it out in another 3 years. And then you have another 3 years. And we're pretty confident by then that everything that will be commonplace in the market that will be off the shelf, and a lot of them are today, are just going to be the financial best sense thing to do over the life of owning a building. So that's what we're really striving for, is really common sense things that will ultimately be good financial decisions on first costs and operating costs. One last quick thing is that, we don't, we do want to acknowledge that there's an opportunity to, keep some of the appliances and equipment you have if you can accommodate solar on your building. So that's like another like twist that you can take for compliance. We're also pretty specifically being mindful that we're not going to penalize people for putting electric vehicles in or electric vehicle chargers. If you're tenants or if you plan on doing that, it's going to increase electricity consumption, but it also reduces tailpipe emissions. So we don't want to penalize anybody for these cross-sector coupling strategies. So again, we really wanted to try and think ahead and get everything out there that could be beneficial, and then remove anything that just didn't seem to make sense or that would have been punitive. So if there's more things like that, we definitely want to hear them in the home stretch. And I'll pass it back to Christine.
Thanks, Mark. Ari, I think we had some discussion questions.
Yeah, but so many great questions that we're really grateful that you're asking us, and we're making some space to answer. So also definitely wanted to hear from folks about kind of how you currently plan capital improvements and maintenance upgrades. Again, I really, thanks to your feedback along the way, I think this has been drafted in a way where it's really meant to meet you at the point of when things in your building are already at the end of their lifespan. And having the city play both a supportive role and to be able to tee up incentives and opportunities to make it easier for you to sort of purchase the most best and efficient options. So that way you save money in the long run, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and ideally it's really a win-win. But this would be so. Don't know if we really have time for it since we're basically at the top of the hour, but would definitely love to keep hearing from all of you. Please, Christine will share contact info in just a sec, but would be great to hear a little bit more about how you currently plan your capital improvements and maintenance upgrades. That will give the city a good sense too of just, again, how to tee up implementation. I'm seeing some people asking if we can share the slides. Yes, we will definitely do that. Everyone who registered will get some the shared slides and a copy of the recording. We can advance the slide, and just quickly with our last few minutes, Emily from the city has been taking lots of amazing notes, I have no doubt, and really capturing all the things that everyone has asked and shared. So yeah, Emily, would love to just hear maybe a couple sort of key takeaways that the city is hearing from this and next steps.
Yeah, thank you everyone for engaging and participating. We've heard what you've said, and I've taken some pretty detailed notes so we can make sure to kind of consider and incorporate this feedback. But some of the threads of kind of what we've heard in the last hour, I think concerns from a lot of folks and challenges for benchmarking and audits for certain buildings, particular considerations for condos, and maybe mixed use and other spaces that have common areas as well. We know we've heard this kind of throughout our engagement that folks want to see help from the city with the costs of compliance. Hearing today also kind of support on the more technical assistance side with benchmarking. Folks are really interested in rebates and incentives. There's also an interest in solar and kind of grants and support to help building owners maybe use solar as a way to comply with this ordinance and make their building more resilient. Also the importance of engaging with tenants. We've shared kind of a couple of ways that we've been doing that, and we'll continue to do so, but maybe more opportunities for kind of just larger education about energy efficiency and energy use. Yeah, I think anything else, Christine or the team want to kind of share back of what we heard.
Thanks, Emily. I think you got it all. And we will share the presentation with folks after the workshop.
Yeah. Want to be mindful of everyone's time who is trying to end their workday or leave by 5. So we will wrap up. However, the project team can linger a little bit if there are any sort of last minute technical questions. And again, just thank you so much for showing up and using your voice and taking part in this. We really are committed to working with the city on developing this in a way that is as much of a win for everyone as possible. So thank you very much for your time, and have a great rest of your evening. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. Oh, and yes,
Oh yeah, I'll
most
see you on.
importantly, keep engaging. There's a website at engage.weho.org/building performance. You can take a picture of that QR code. We will send out this slide. That's Christine's contact info, who again is a senior planner at the city. Please keep providing your comments and feedback to her as well. And thanks so much, everybody. We really appreciate it.